702.
The Big Interview
With Bongani Bingwa.
Call it a story of courage, certainly a story of commitment, and perhaps even love. I told you yesterday of a story that I picked up in the Sunday Times of a couple's journey with fertility. They were married, I think, around 2015, and he was diagnosed with cancer. They obviously at some point planned to start a family, and so because he was going to undergo chemotherapy, they were advised to freeze his sperm so that it wouldn't be impacted by the treatments he was receiving. As it happened, he didn't make it after beginning the chemo process, and he died. Years later, his widow decided to expand her family, and she remembered, of course, the fertility clinic still had that frozen sperm. She tried to access it, and the clinic felt there was no record of him saying what was to be done with it after he passed on. It led to a court battle, which the wife won, and we thought we'd give you some background to the story and where things are now. We're going to call her for the protection of her family and her children using a pseudonym. We'll call her Marie Ann. Marie Ann, a very good morning to you and welcome to 702 Breakfast.
Good morning, Bongani. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I really appreciate you talking to us. Have I told your story correctly? Did I miss anything?
A little. I can definitely fill in the gaps and provide more information. So my late husband was diagnosed prior to us even meeting with Hodgkin's lymphoma. He went through stem cell transplant using his own stem cells, which didn't take. How fate happens, we met, and after his second stem cell transplant using a donor and getting the all clear, we got engaged and we got married. But what they don't tell you, or what they do tell you, but they don't provide all the facts about it, is that once you have a donor stem cell transplant, you get something called GVHD, or graft versus host disease, which they want you to get because it reduces the risk of the cancer coming back.
Right.
With my late, and during that time, obviously we knew that we had to go the fertility route, and we started soon after we got married. We had the first implant, which didn't take. The second one took, and about 3 months into being pregnant, my husband started with GVHD, which affected his skin, that it became very thick, like scleroderma. That it became very hard for him to walk or to move or to do anything physical. And then 19 days before our daughter was born, he went into multiple organ failure and was put on life support. And that's when it all started, I guess. And our daughter was born. He unfortunately wasn't there physically to be there. He was in hospital for about 4 months, and then he came home. He got to meet our daughter, and we spent 6 months with him between home and rehab. And then in that August, during that time we found out that his lungs were functioning at 24%. We sought out all forms of medical treatment overseas, and he was on biologics. And in August, the lungs were taking a lot more strain, and he passed on the 10th of August. So,
gosh, how long ago was that? 8
years ago. This year would be 8 years ago. So our daughter was 6 months old when he passed away.
All right, Marianne, bring us up to speed. He passed on 8 years ago. What made you decide to expand your family? And just help me understand the thinking behind then going back to the clinic and saying, hey, hang on, we've got that frozen sperm. Can we have access to that?
So it all came about probably about a year after he had passed. I hadn't received my invoice from the fertility clinic to pay for my annual payment. And I rang them up and I asked them for an invoice. And why haven't they invoiced me? And then they informed me that there is a legal concern around maintaining my, I still have embryos and his sperm. And then that's when it all started. Hopefully one day I would love to give my daughter a second, a sibling, a biological one. But at that stage, I I couldn't do anything with it. It was all up in the air. And then we sought out legal assistance and legal guidance with Adele and her team, who said that we actually have a case. I would like to maintain it. The law in the country doesn't really state it. My late husband hadn't put it in his will that he left his sperm or the embryos to me to use. That's when it all started. So it's been pretty much a 6-year journey that's gotten us to having the judgment passed that I'm now a legal owner of both the embryos and the sperm. So one day, if I want to expand my family, which I would like to, I'm now able
have the
to do
option.
that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
All right, stay on the line. Adele van der Walt is a fertility and medical lawyer and represented you in this case and was listening to that in terms of how Marie-Anne has framed it, Adele. Many people, of course, who try to go the fertility route with clinics don't always have this information, do they?
Good morning, Bongani. No, certainly no. It can be quite complex. It's a super specialized field, and I think the most important thing here is actually with the steps going forward is the consent forms, the paperwork. What happened here specifically, Vitalab, Stanton, Dr. Gobetz is one of the senior partners and really one of our pioneers in fertility law in the country, highly regarded internationally too. And the ethical consideration here was rather, if the paperwork is not addressing this, where are they standing? And that's where we looked then at Regulation 18 of the National Health Act. That is addressing ownership of material, but on this matter, it was about the transferability of the ownership and then specifically working with the sperm, but also the embryos, and it can become quite technical.
I mean, it's extraordinary to think in Marie-Anne's case, for example, that she then didn't necessarily have ownership of her own embryos after a time. Is that the case?
Okay, so we have to differentiate here. What the Act is saying, Regulation 18 is saying usually when you've got it, we also differentiate between married couples and unmarried couples. I can take you through that in a minute. So usually the owner is a female person, the recipient. But then again, as I've said, we worked here with the sperm and embryos. But if we haven't had an embryo disposition agreement beforehand, an embryo disposition agreement addresses death. What happens if one party or both passes on what happens to the embryos, or if there's incapacity, mental or bodily incapacity, or both, or divorce or separation. So we refer to that as an embryo disposition. If that has not been addressed, and we also have to appreciate the fact that the fertility law in South Africa has developed quite immensely within the last 10 years, and obviously the legal side to that as well. If the documentation is not addressing this, there's also ethical considerations and legal ramifications, and that's why the clinic advised Marie to sought legal advice.
Marie, are you still planning then to expand your family? Where are you feeling now? Where are you sitting now?
Well, I think this made it very, very more real than what it's been in the last, couple of years. I think any parent or any family out there understands the cost of living, and being on a single parent income, and as I mentioned, I have a daughter already. It does put a little bit of a spanner in the work, but I would love to give my daughter a sibling. So. Never know what the future holds. I always say, when I win the lottery, I've still got to take that because you win the lottery.
But it's nice to have the option should you want to take it up. I appreciate your time and for joining us and telling us your story. Good luck to you and your family. Adele, I'll let you have the last word on this. As I say, many South Africans are using fertility as a route to plan their families for all sorts of reasons. Biggest lesson from all of this?
I think for the consumer out there, one should appreciate the fact that 1 out of every 5 to 6 couples work with fertility treatment. That means when somebody can't fall pregnant naturally after 12 months, make sure the paperwork is in place. Make sure you make consider the facts, whether if you're a donor or you have frozen material, what happens in certain circumstances, especially with donors too. So donating material, we get known and unknown donors. What happens if I have a health issue and I can't use my own eggs or my own sperm further? And the permanency of that, because you can't retract once you've done a donation. But in this case, I think what is amazing is the court gave a ruling on transferability of embryos and genetic material, and it will be approached or considered by the courts on a case-by-case matter. We also differentiated between subjective and objective rights, but also that it's a class of its own with genetic material.
All right, Adele van der Walt is a fertility and medical lawyer. Make sure it's all written down.